Ladies and gentlemen of the Nova Nation, today is Tuesday, February 23rd, and it is almost March. So thank you for joining us tonight ahead of Villanova against St. John's. Villanova's hosting St. John's in the Finneran Pavilion for round 2 of this home-and-home season series. This game is going to be coming up at the top of the hour on CBS Sports Network. So today's topics, we got a lot to cover. We only got 20 minutes to cover it. So we're going to be going rapid fire. As always, we're going to start around the horn at the top of college basketball and what's going on around the country. We're going to do a segment tonight on Villanova content we love. So these are the Villanova content creators that I personally follow, that I'm personally checking up on, before every game, when I'm doing content prep, on Twitter during games, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, we'll get into what we saw from Villanova in Saturday's win against UConn. We're going to dish out some big hashtag attitude awards from what we've seen recently from the Cats. We'll check in with what's going on with the Johnnies since we saw them last. And finally, what to watch for in tonight's game. So, like I said, a lot to cover in now 19 minutes. Quick programming note before I get into anything too meaty. Two things. Number one, don't forget that CBS Sports Network totally sucks for all of you cord cutters out there. Mind you, usually Nova plays 1 to 2 games a season, maybe 3 at most on CBS Sports Network. It always creeps up on you if you're a cord cutter and you don't have cable. If you have cable, you probably are like, what the heck is he talking about? If you don't have cable, you know exactly what I'm talking about. These are our least favorite games of the year. Sometimes you can get away with watching it on the CBS Sports Network website if you have a friend or a family's cable provider login. You didn't hear that from me. It wasn't working last game, the last time we played on CBS Sports Network. So the best bet is going to be to sign up for a free trial of a TV streaming service. I used YouTube TV, worked just fine. And then the second programming note is we're going to do a live postgame tonight on Clubhouse. So join us for that immediately after the game if you want to hear me riffing on the game and what we saw with the guys, Chris and Rob, from the Full 40 Villanova podcasts. All right, so now that the programming notes are out of the way, we're going to get into the meat of the action. Starting off around the top of college basketball, the first thing I have to shout out is that Michigan versus Ohio State game on Sunday. It was just such beautiful, let's call it March-adjacent basketball. Michigan won this game. Michigan third ranked, Ohio State ranked 4th. Michigan won 92-87. This was a game that was just back and forth. It felt like no team really ever had a lead bigger than like 4 or 5 points. And these were 2 really good teams. These were 2 elite caliber teams. Wouldn't surprise me if one or both of these teams make it to the Final Four. There's been a lot of talk since the game that Michigan has sort of distanced themselves from the rest of the pack and should be considered in that elite class along with Gonzaga and Baylor. And I think, to be completely honest, there are a number of teams in the top 10 where if you catch them on their best night, they're going to be in that class. Sort of a nice segue into our friends Gonzaga with their absolute powder puff conference schedule rolling right along. Of course, the disclaimer here is Gonzaga's had a stacked non-conference. I've said this every time as a disclaimer because it's normal for people to complain about Gonzaga's strength of schedule. This year, their non-conference was dynamite in late November and December, but they haven't played anybody since then. And then you've got the likes of Baylor, who other than COVID pauses, has been running through an absolutely loaded Big 12 and is still undefeated. So interestingly enough, the Big 12 released their updated schedule for next week and threw a ton at Baylor. So next week, this is starting a week from tomorrow, Baylor is going to play at West Virginia next Tuesday, against Oklahoma State at home next Thursday, and against Texas Tech for their last game of the season the following Sunday. So that's 3 games in like 5 or 6 days against all really good teams, against tournament caliber teams. West Virginia and Texas Tech, both of whom are going to be ranked in the top 25 at the time they played that game. So you have to imagine if Baylor runs the gamut here, they have to overtake Gonzaga for the number 1 overall seed in the tournament, right? Like they just have to. Especially considering that Gonzaga is rumored to be considering withdrawing from their conference tournament because, frankly, it's hard to blame them because they don't really have a lot to gain from playing in a mid-major conference tournament. The only thing that could happen to them is either they have COVID issues from it, which obviously don't want, or they take a bad loss. But if they withdraw from that tournament and Baylor, regardless of what happens in the Big 12 tournament, Baylor would have to be the number 1 overall team in the country per the bracket, in my opinion. So the other sort of big storyline, I would say, from the last couple of days has been the resurgent dead Blue Bloods. You've got Duke on a 4-game winning streak and just having beat 7th-ranked UVA. And you've got Kentucky, who has been left for dead long ago, who absolutely smoked number 19 number 19 Tennessee at Tennessee on Saturday. So it'll be interesting to see if one or both of these teams can make enough noise to get into the tournament. It seems like a lot of people are high on Duke to be able to still sneak in as an at-large bid. Kentucky might have a little bit more work to do, but it's interesting to see them sort of, on this resurgent path. When you consider Big East bubble watch, you look at the worst case scenario for the Big East actually looking pretty bleak. Because as of right now, if you look at ESPN's bracketology, you've got Seton Hall currently among the last 4 byes, meaning they wouldn't have to play one of those play-in games. You've got Xavier listed among the last 4 teams in, meaning they would play in one of those 11-seed play-in games. And then you've got UConn second on the list of last 4 out. So if things broke the wrong way and none of these teams are able to get in, you have Villanova and Creighton are the only ones holding it down for the Big East, which obviously isn't a great look for the conference this year. In what I don't think was necessarily a terrible year for the conference, I just think you have too many of these teams like Seton Hall, like Xavier, like UConn, like St. John's, who we see tonight, who are probably right around that bubble character, who have all just been absolutely kind of cannibalizing each other. So checking in on where Nova stands as far as the bracket goes, Joe Lunardi from ESPN currently has Villanova as a 2 seed in the Michigan region, which I don't hate. Michigan has looked great. They've only had 1 loss in a loaded Big Ten, which seems like it's the conference of the year. However, with this Villanova team, you never know. You put them up against the likes of Gonzaga, against the Baylor, against the Michigan, and if Nova can shoot the lights out, I think they can pretty much beat anybody. The X factor, as we'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit, is going to be the defense and whether or not the defense can show up, as it's been sort of a down defensive year for a Jay Wright coach team. Alas, if you look at the wider bracket, the sort of the 1-2s in each region right now are Gonzaga 1, Iowa 2 in their region, Baylor 1, Illinois 2 in their region, Michigan 1, Nova 2 in region 3, and then Ohio State 1 and Alabama 2 in region 4. Lots of moving and shaking expected still over the next 2 weeks, so that is anything but locked in, but figured you all would appreciate a quick update there. So moving on to a new segment, Villanova basketball content we love. A lot of folks have been asking me, what Villanova content do I follow? Completely regardless of Villanova Tip Time in this show, what am I listening to? What am I reading? First and foremost, and I have to shout them out because they did have me on their most recent episode, are the guys over at the Full 40 podcast, Chris and Rob. We actually all graduated from Villanova the same year, class of 2009. They've been doing the podcast for, I think this is their 4th season now. They've developed a really impressive roster of guests over the years, having sort of become friendly with members of the program, members of the alumni, and sort of, having interviewed former players. And I was very proud to add myself to the list of their list of distinguished guests when they had me on Saturday night for the episode that dropped Sunday to talk about a little bit about Villanova Tip Time. And they've been really supportive of this. But then also, like I said earlier, I'm going to be joining those guys. We're all going to be on Clubhouse after the game doing live breakdown. Some of the other things to call out, if they're not already on your radar, they should be VUHoops.com. If you're a Villanova student or a Villanova alum, I would be shocked if you're not familiar with VU Hoops and go to it as sort of like one of your go-to more like website-based news that's Nova-specific. They also have a really good podcast called the State of the Nova Nation podcast that I would highly recommend you check out if you're a podcaster. Coach Wright actually has his own podcast as well, which I'm hoping many of you know, called Inside Villanova Basketball. And that's, if you are a disciple of the Church of Coach Wright, like I am and many of us are, chances are you know about that and you're listening frequently. And then to plug some of the Twitter and Instagram handles that I really like, John Rothstein on Twitter. For any of you that follow me, I kind of have a little bit of a love affair with him, geek out on his stuff. Love following him on Twitter. Nova Insider, great Twitter and Instagram account to follow for insights into what's going on inside the program. And then I think finally Nova Nationer on Instagram is one of the ones that I happen to enjoy following the most. They do a lot of what they call VU fangrams, where people, Villanova marriages, Villanova babies, all that good stuff. And of course, just a general love for the university and the program. All right. So what did we see on Saturday against UConn? I think the emerging theme that we've called out before is whether or not we can get one or both of what I call our Naismith boys going. Colin Gillespie and Jeremiah Robinson-Earl both made that top 20 finalist list for the Naismith Player of the Year award. And the X factor in games where we've played poorly or lost has always been the Naismith guys, as I call them, struggling, right? And that did not happen in this UConn game. Gillespie had 20 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl had 17 points and 11 rebounds and 2 steals. Very nice double-double. And while Gillespie's stat line was really nice, it also wasn't necessarily his best game. In many respects, I thought he had an average night. He had a few turnovers. He missed at least 1 or 2 sort of bunnies, easy layups. But he had that vibe of like, we're not going to lose this game. And I sort of saw that early, and you saw that from him consistently throughout the game. And you saw at some point that became contagious. The story of the game was that it was neck and neck, really the whole first half. I think Nova took a 2-point lead into halftime. And then, you just saw something kind of click. I called it between the 16-minute TV timeout and the 12-minute TV timeout, where Nova was able to play. They seemed like they were stepping it up a notch as far as overall aggression. The other thing to call out was that the Cats had missed the memo in the first half that containing James Bouknight was the game plan. But they then put Brandon Slater, their most intense defender, on him, who completely shut Bouknight down in the second half, which turned out to be really the X factor in the game and pulling out the W. And it was a spark plug for the rest of the team because, like I said, you saw the rest of the team sort of take on this little bit more of aggressive attitude from that 16-minute mark in the second half through to the rest of the game. And they were able to grind out this kind of gritty, not pretty, but it'll do kind of win. Sort of a weird thing was Caleb Daniels started the game but didn't get a lot of minutes. It was mostly attributed to the foul trouble that he seemed to be in that first half. Some speculation that he's still having lingering issues with the calf. You have to think if Nova can grind out these W's and even get some big W's without him, if they can get him going, look out. So that'll be something to key in on and see if we can get a nice game out of Caleb Daniels, who seems like he's had a kind of a slow second half to the season coming off of the long COVID pause. Looking at the clock, we only have 7 minutes left and we still have a lot to cover. But the point that I really want to convey that I keep coming back to is this notion of predator versus prey. We talked about it a little bit before the UConn game. Where Nova has fallen short this year has been where they've kind of succumbed to being the prey for a team that desperately needed to beat them for whatever reason. And they played like it. And the game showed in that the intensity of the opponent far outweighed the intensity of Nova. And I was talking to Chris Bellotti from the Full 40 about this. And he was quick, in talking about this predator versus prey mentality. And he said something along the lines of, sometimes they're so all business that they really forget to kind of bring it. And they succumb at times to a more emotional, a more passionate opponent being able to sort of match and exceed them in their intensity. So you saw this at that 16-minute TV timeout of the second half. You saw that switch where up until that point, Villanova was playing a little bit more like prey for UConn than they were like predator. And then you saw that switch, that intensity switch, that aggressiveness switch. And they became the predator, and then lo and behold, they were able to sort of maintain that small lead, and again stretch the lead out to the point where they not only covered the game spread, they covered most of the live lines throughout the game as well. So really interesting sort of gambling note there, but that they were able to turn it on and be more aggressive and pull away. So that brings us to a new segment, which is big #attitude. What are the big attitude, the big, sort of ideal Nova things we've seen over the last couple of days? Number one has to be Brandon Slater on defense and shutting down James Bouknight after Bouknight completely owned the first half, particularly the beginning of the first half. It was really just crazy how that was the memo the Cats seemed to miss, but then they put, Coach Wright put Brandon Slater on book night and just sort of handcuffed him. Book night played pretty poor from there on in after Slater got on him. The second big hashtag attitude has to go to Colin Gillespie being named a top 5 Kuzi Award finalist, which goes to the top point guard in the nation. You see people on Twitter talking about, I've seen a couple of tweets in recent days, like how remarkable is the career growth, the player growth that we've seen from Colin Gillespie, that he's not only a Naismith top 20 finalist, but he's on the top point guard in the nation, top 5 finalist list. That's a testament to him. That's a testament to his work effort. It's a testament to the Villanova program and Coach Wright. But he is certainly deserving of the first installment of the big hashtag attitude award. And then finally, I have to call out Jermaine Samuels. Even when he's not being the star, like on Saturday, he only had 11 points in the game. He was diving all over the place. He was making hustle plays on both ends of the floor, and he was just showing up doing the little things, which he's done this season in good games and in bad games. He's always brought that intensity, so you want to call him out. So what's up with the Johnnies since we last saw those folks? They took control of a national conversation about them as a bubble team and maybe more after they beat Villanova on February 3rd. It's funny, we're almost into March. That you could convince me that game was just a few days ago. But it was almost a whole month ago now. At the time, it was their 5th straight win. They tacked on another win after that at Providence to extend their streak to 6. But since then, they've lost 2 of 3. Their recent losses come at Butler, which is pretty bad, and home to DePaul, which is horrible. So St. John's has painted themselves into quite a little corner here where they were sort of a rising bubble team working their way to an at-large bid, have now slid back off such that they are not even in the last 4 in. They're the next level out removed from that, which almost makes tonight a must-win for them because they only have Providence and Seton Hall remaining on their calendar. So you don't like to see that. You don't want that if you're Villanova. Obviously, having yet another game where this game is going to mean a lot to the opponent. Who are you looking for? The big name, Julian Champagny. He is the in the conversation for Big East Player of the Year. He's averaging, I think, 21 points a game now. He's the go-to guy for St. John's. But worth noting, in their recent losses to Butler and DePaul, he's had pretty good games, but they're not getting a lot of help from the other starters in those games. They've had some nice play from bench guys, particularly junior forward Isaiah Moore, who's had some really nice games off the bench lately. But it's been Champagny having good games and nobody else really showing up from that starting lineup. So I've called Julian Champagny. I've called out Isaiah Moore. I have to call out Posh Alexander as well, who's distinguished himself as one of the star freshmen in the Big East, but he's been very quiet in recent losses. So you don't know what to make of that. Maybe he's, containing him is a key. Also due for a breakout game. Not, things to keep in mind, we'll say. So what to watch for at night? Like I said earlier, what's at stake for St. John's is can't be overstated, right? They have fallen back on the bubble with games after this to Providence, who's not a tournament team, and Seton Hall, who is also a sort of bubble, but on the inside of bubble team. This is their biggest game left in the schedule, barring a Big East tournament game against the Creighton or Villanova. So it means a lot for St. John's tonight. That plus the fact that they're coming off of a bad loss against DePaul as their most recent game on Saturday, plus the style of play that the Johnnies play, this 40 minutes of hell style that seemed to wreak havoc on Villanova last time, that's going to make a tough test tonight for the Cats. One thing to talk about with that 40 minutes of hell style is that turnovers were indeed a problem for Villanova in that first matchup, but they weren't until middle or later in the game. The first 15 minutes of the game, I don't think Noah was particularly terrible with turnovers. They were breaking the press enough, but they were struggling when they would get into that. They broke the press and they would get into a 3-on-2. It was almost like they didn't know what to do with their hands and they were pulling the ball back out. They weren't taking advantage of those matchup advantages. And VU Hoops actually did a good job to call this out in pregame, that this is something that happened in the first game that you'd like to see Nova correct tonight and be able to take advantage of those opportunities when they break the press. And you have to imagine that Coach Wright has had the team working on this in practice, as it was sort of a sore spot from that first game. Defense has been a sore spot for Nova this year. They're playing among the worst defense in the Big East with adjusted percentages lately, especially. But Saturday's game was the best defensive game you saw from Nova in quite a while. It actually, statistically, the second half of the game against UConn was the best defensive basketball Villanova's played all year. First time St. John's and Nova played, St. John's was uncharacteristically hot from three. Can Lightning strike twice? I don't know. And if it can't, Nova's real test is going to be whether they can show up against that dribble drive, which is really otherwise St. John's like constant go-to style in the offensive style. So you'd like to see Villanova be able to play a little bit better defense tonight than we saw the first time around. The two thoughts I'm going to leave you with are that Colin Gillespie had his worst game of the year in the first matchup between these teams, and he remembers it. It's not going to happen again. He might score a zillion points tonight. I love the Colin Gillespie game tonight. Above all else, points or no points, I expect him to fiercely control the ball and command this offense straight on through this 40 minutes of hell. And I expect Nova to get take advantage a lot more of those 3-on-2 matchups. And I expect Gillespie to be racking up at least a couple of those assists. The other note is that Justin Moore was 4 of 14 shooting on Saturday, and he's too good of a player for that to happen in back-to-back games. So I think Gillespie and I think Justin Moore are the two guys that are going to the names I'm calling tonight, in addition to Jeremiah Robinson-Earl taking advantage of some front court favorable matchups. Finally, don't forget to join us on Clubhouse for postgame. But I am super excited for this matchup tonight with Villanova and St. John's. Again, tipping off on CBS Sports Network around right now. So with that, I'm going to leave you, ladies and gentlemen of the Villanova Nation. It is tip time, and I'll see you soon.